My name is Jim McHugh. I'm one of the owners of the Opera House Pacific and the McHugh and Daly Mercantile Building, which was built in 1904, completed at the end of the World's Fair, and opened on New Year's Eve of 1908. It's the largest building in this area, and I think most of Franklin County at the turn of the century. It's a product that was built by my grandfather 115 years ago. He was very active. He and his partner, Jim Daly, were very active in the Louisiana Purchase Exposition Company, which was the company, of course, that managed the World's Fair. Incidentally, it's the only World's Fair in history that ever made any money. So it was clearly well managed, and it was directed and headed by the president, David Francis. Francis, of course, was governor of Missouri at one time, and then later he took on this challenge of the 1904 World's Fair, president of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition Company, that contracted for all of the events and for the 1904 World's Fair. They contracted with the Board of Aldermen of the city of St. Louis to use all of Forest Park, over 1,000 acres, which probably 80% of it was under roof. So you get the idea of the extent and the size of the buildings. The buildings were all made of a product called staff, which is a mixture of plaster Paris and horsehair, which gave it the substance of kind of a concrete, but it had a short shelf life, so that it was only designed to last a year or so from erosion and weather and what have you. So that was really the World's Fair background. It was the contract with the Louisiana Purchase Exposition Company required the company to return the Forest Park to its original condition as a public park 6 months after the close of the fair. So they had a tremendous logistical problem, and that was to get all of this huge amounts of material out of the fairgrounds and out of Forest Park and get it somewhere. So there was an understanding, and in the contract was a penalty clause to the Louisiana Purchase Acquisition Company if they didn't clear the park and return it within 6 months. They had penalty clauses in the contracts. Since my grandfather and his partner were active with the Louisiana Purchase Acquisition Company, they had permission or almost plead, come and get anything you want and get it off the fairgrounds. So that was the incentive behind it all. And my grandfather and Jim Daly decided that they had this lot here in Pacific where we're sitting right now, where the building is. And they brought 11 carloads worth of material. That means bricks and mortar, but all the ornamentals. The fair was had a marvelous collection of a lot of antiquity, and they brought it out here with them and built this building out of it. Hired an architect, put all the material in a big pile out here and just next door to the building in the lot next door, and hired an architect and built this building out of it. And so it was built between 1904, at the close of the fair, and the opening, which was New Year's Eve in 1908. And it was very interesting that at that time, vaudeville came to the United States in about 1910. It really developed in Europe and came here it came to the United States in about 1910, and it was gaining in popularity because if you think there wasn't any other means to expand the culture through theater and art. And so that's really led us to this situation. My grandfather, looking at it, said he was kind of a build it and they will come mentality, and he decided that vaudeville was going to be a big thing. And so he built this building with the specifications of a vaudeville theater. Now that isn't opera houses as we know them, but they're opera houses, what they called them in 1908. And but vaudeville came to the United States about 1910, and they built the Palace Theater in New York, Palace Theater in Chicago, and these troops would come and play the Palace. You've heard them say about that. That was the pinnacle. If you got to one of the Palace of New York or Chicago, that means you reached the top of your game, in effect. Many of the that were still known by your generation were Bob Hope and was a Big Crosby, Jimmy Durante, Sophie Tucker. All of those were, they all were vaudevillians. And the way the vaudeville circuits worked, you'd come to the Palace, or you'd work your way up to the Palace from a chain of, smaller theater networks throughout the country. And but the way they would work, if you made the Palace, then and you played your tour there, then what did you do? Well, then they decided you'd have to find a market. So they followed the railroad, and they went west. In our case, they came, the St. Louis troops, it was the old Orpheum Circuit, they would get on the train and go west. Well, they came out, they could go to Pacific, because that's about as far as a steam engine that was driven with coal or wood that's about as far as they could go without being refueled. About 30 miles was the radius from their starting point. So they ended up in Pacific, and Pacific ended up having a little center of a town that built up around this end of the railroad. And so my grandfather and his partner bought all these things out, all these carloads of stuff, and put it in the big pile. And of course that caused created the Opera House here. There's all kinds of ornamentals up there that were a product of that era. So they built a stage. They bought a stage out. There were about 1,000 stages in Forest Park during and they bought a stage out because it accommodating this traveling minstrels, So they built the stages upstairs, but they had to have a dressing room on one side, the other one for the man, and one side for the women. So anyway, but we have a men's restroom and a women's dressing room, and that was kind of the unwritten credentials that you had to have if you wanted to get a decent troupe to stop here. You also had to have a grand piano. That was kind of the central of the music theme, because they could tap dance to it, the bands could play, needed it, to accommodate some of their arrangements. Singers needed it as a support piece, so that was really the key to having a venue where these troops the ones of any credential would come. So that's what happened here. My grandfather got this Decker Brothers grand piano. It was built in about 1985 or 89, and it was the Decker Brothers was the largest piano builder in the country. And they were in New York, but when old man Decker died, there was nobody in the family that had the credential or the initiative to continue the company, so they closed and sold all their patents to a little piano company that was coming along called Steinway. And so Steinway pianos were built really on the mechanisms of this piano upstairs. And and they of course went on and improved it until what they have the premier piano company in the world today, I suppose.
Is the piano still the original one that
So,
your grandfather
yes, so the original one. And when we had it, we spent about $15,000 having it completely rebuilt, or not rebuilt, but because there weren't any parts around. You have to hand make any of the parts because they weren't available on the secondary market anywhere. So that's what we had done. And they said, well, we can put a whole new Steinway mechanism in here. And he said, it'll sound like a brand new Steinway. I said, I can spend half the money and go buy a brand new Steinway. I said, I want this piano reconstructed the way it was and sounding like it did. That's what we used, all the same, although it was playable, it was just horribly out of tune. And so we put all, they did a complete remodel of it. But it sounds exactly like a piano did in the turn of the century, which is a different sound. And so it also has a different feel to it because, the mechanisms, the works have been improved so that, you have a quicker recovery time on the keys, you're easier to push down and what have you. So it's a different style, but people who are piano experts are, they love to come out and play it because they're like you. They have a driving interest in history and antiquity, and so they come out and they love to play it, and they do. So we do have concerts upstairs, and we have a dance here, a dance of. And focus on music at that time. Remember, this place was opened in 1908, and at that time, in the history of music development, but popular music development in the United States, was Scott Joplin and Blind Boone and that whole crowd were playing the rags and ragtime at that time, and they all really made up to the popular music venue at that time. So they were, so we focused on the music that we present here at the Opera House in that first 50 years of the 20th century, because that's when it all happened here. And then at the end of the Second World War, as the television and radio and all came in, these places all died. Their audiences were non-existent, but people really loved it, and it was very, as I say, very popular at that time. So when we came back and started these programs and what have you, we sort of focused on that area, which went everywhere from ragtime, through the A90s, the Roaring Twenties, which was really the development of jazz in this country. So we had a lot of jazz musicians played up there, all the way up through the Roaring Twenties up until the World War II. World War II came along, in about 1935 was the introduction of the big bands, the Tommy Darcy's, the Glenn Millers, and they played and really drove the music agenda during the Second World War. And then after the World War, it all changed. And this building, became just had a liquor, one of the owners had a liquor store downstairs. But originally, it was where our grandfathers had their general store, because this was a rural community, so anything you couldn't make or construct on the farm, you went to the general store, so you got things that were a selected number of products. And he had other things, you know, that some of the folks that lived around the city, you know, the farmers would bring their eggs and poultry and things of that nature in, and that was sold at the general store. The old Cracker Barrels and things of that nature were all there. And that became the business, and that was on the first floor. Here on the second floor where we are, this is where the two families lived, the Dailies and McHughs. That's where it was initially called the McHugh and Daly Mercantile Building. And here's where all the kids were raised, and there was a bunch of them. I think the Dailies had 9, and my McHugh family, I think, was 6. And they all grew up raised in this building and on this floor. And then they had the Opera House on the 3rd floor, which served as a general, it not only was a vaudeville location, it was a place where everybody graduated, everybody had their wedding parties and all kinds of, you know, of other events that were community events. It was really kind of used as a community center. The interesting thing about this building is that of that type of building built for that purpose, filling that 50-year gap, they at that time they would have, I'd say, all those community events and community center events during that period of time. So, but this was the only remaining that we know of as remaining building of this nature that was really filled that area, that still exists today, that is still owned by the families that built it. It's the only one around here. It's the only one, you know, if you wanted to hear a vaudeville show, or you wanted to have a first-class venue for whatever kind of event you had, that's where they came here. And so this was built about 25 years before the Red Cedar, or before the highway came through. The highway came through in about 1926, when Highway 66 came through. In that time, if you wanted to get out here, people rode the railroad. And the railroad was just then went from here, went on to Kansas City and to Colorado, then Denver, and on out to the West Coast. And the southern route went south to Oklahoma City and Texarkana and on out to the west. But they both come together, they divide right here. One railroad goes west to the central route and the other one south. But to the southern route, all going eventually to California. But anyway, we're here, and that's interesting about it, and we're trying to construct that story. It's all here in bricks and mortar, you know, just to be found. I don't know whether you saw the mural out front.
I did see the mural, yeah.
And that was painted by Charlie Darling, who's a local artist. Charlie played a big role in the development of this city. He's a story all himself. Charlie, Spitball Charlie, they called him. But Charlie, yeah, he's world champion trick shot artist in pool, and he played with all the greats, you know, and in pool, and he's a great himself in pool. But Charlie is also an artist and a painter. And
who did these paintings?
Oh, these were all painted by my Uncle Joe, the guy right there in the corner.
Huh.
And he spent 50 years painting all these, painted all the 52 presidents, I think, that were alive, or who was alive in his life. His last painting was Bill Clinton, which he painted him well, it was the last one that he painted before he died. And he lived so long as I have, you know, it was my early 90s. He was, but it's very interesting, there's a whole history of that. He took him a year per painting, so 50 years. The interesting thing about it is not that somebody can do it and have the talent to do it, but the discipline to do it over a 50-year period, paint one painting a year. I mean, that's what it averaged out to and be interested enough to do all the history of the paintings, because these paintings are not paintings of the presidents that you normally see. They're a composite of all the paintings that he could find of that president, and he put it all together in a kind of a composite image of that president. Notice behind all of the presidents are paintings of ladies, a couple of men, but they're all dressed in the style of the day, and they're in that administration. So that took a tremendous amount of research just to get all that together.
And the consistency, like you can all tell they're by the same person, the same style.
Yeah, and to build it, to do it over, it's still, the discipline of it is the thing that impressed me. I mean, it's the artist considerations and art consideration and creativity that's in each one of the paintings are very interesting. But how do you stay focused on one project for 50 years, taking one 50th every year for 50 years to create the collection here? Most of, about 80% of those paintings were painted right here in this room we're sitting in. This was his studio.
And this is called the President's Room?
Yes, well, for obvious reasons. That didn't take any great genius to come up with that idea. We used to, I'm a lawyer by profession, you know, and so that doesn't mean anything, except I was the logical guy that could set something like this up, so we formed the Pacific Partnership. The Pacific Partnership was basically dedicated, they still have it in their mission statement, dedicated to the improvement and preservation of the old town and area. And we set that up as a 501c3 corporation to provide that service, and it's going on today, and you know, leadership changes, everybody contributes something to that history along the way. So the partnership basically was formed to develop and preserve the old town area, which is where we are right now. And the original credential to just, well, it wasn't exclusive in any way, but it was really made up of people who owned pieces of property in the old town area, because they had the greatest incentive to preserve it and develop it, and able to do it, because they had the title to the properties, whatever. So all of this, everything that's happened in the old town here really has its roots in the partnership agenda, you know, so.
And when did that start?
Well, I think we formed the partnership in about 20 years ago, I guess. I don't remember the exact date. It's all in the record, you know, all in file with the Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm.
But it's gone on all these years, you know, and we use what we call the Magi Foundation, which is a 501c3 that we started. I was president of the university. We started it to repatriate funds out of Ireland because the University of Missouri, we had a very aggressive program in Ireland with student exchange and with economic development projects. And we particularly got heavily involved with the Prime Minister of Ireland and the Prime Minister of England, John Majors at the time, to develop a program to help resolve the troubles, as they called them, the conflict between the North and the South. And so it was during that time, we were very active with leadership over there. And we finally figured out the way we could do these, so bring these people together, but the best way to do it was to do it under the radar. And it kind of as an economic development project as opposed to a political resolution. So we started working with with the colleges primarily that were dealing with these cross-border issues. It was you know how the Irish are storytelling. Well, there's thousands of stories about this. The one that amused me always the most was the biggest asset that was taxed were sheep, and so the farmers on the north and south of the political divide all had big herds of sheep, and the taxmen would tax you by the number of sheep you had. So they'd come out and they'd count your sheep and they'd put you down. That's for your tax bill. Well, the farmers were smart enough that they got the idea. Well, this is kind of silly. So what they would do when the tax man from the United Kingdom came by, they would drive all the sheep across the line down into the Irish farmers. The tax man come along and says, "How come you got just a few sheep and your neighbor is so successful?" He says, "It's politics, they have a good story behind them, and they're not." So anyway, that was. Well, anyway, we were telling you about the universities involved. So John Bruton, who was at that time, this was during the Troubles. John Bruton was here in St. Louis, and he had some relatives out in DeSoto, Missouri, and he wanted to go out and visit them. So they came to me to see if the university could be of some assistance. And I said, sure. Well, he wanted to see some local farms. They're all farmers, whether they're full-time or part-time. But so he came out, and they asked me if I could arrange it. I said, sure. At that time, I had the position, I could do it. So I just said, we're going to set up a real first-class tour of some farms around here, and we're in DeSoto, Missouri, around St. Louis County, to show John Bruton, who was the Prime Minister of Ireland at that time. They called them Taoiseachs. That's the name. That's the Irish name for the Prime Minister, Taoiseach. So John Bruton, Taoiseach, John Bruton. I had the I was fortunate, but I was in the position at the time, so I went with John and we toured all these farms. And I sat next to him on the bus during a few hours. I don't know how long it was now, but we went to all these different farms and look at their machinery and talk about their production and things of that nature. But all this time that we were riding together, I started telling him about one of the features that we had at the University of Missouri that I thought might have some interest to him, and that was the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, which was at the University of Missouri, and it all came out of the National Agricultural Service, which was in Washington, D.C., and they had all these representatives from the 9 land-grant colleges in the Midwest that were there, and they developed an econometric model of agriculture, world agriculture. There was one for University of Missouri took the model for the United States, and others like the University of Nebraska did Europe, and others did the Far East and what have you. And what they did is they developed it, and won a Nobel Prize for it, incidentally. They developed an econometric model in which, it was quite a development at that time. Today, we were really doing some artificial intelligence then, didn't know what we were doing, But what would happen is they constructed this computer model that, because there's so many variables in an agricultural model, dealing with price and weather and all of those things. So they put that all together in a huge algorithm. But at first they did forecasts. They called it outlooks, because forecasts carried too much responsibility with it. So outlook was kind of a backseat way of doing it. And so they built these models, and the Congress was becoming more and more dependent on these. This was when Kit Bond was senator here, and Kit had a great interest in in Missouri agriculture. So, and it really became quite an important instrument to the Congress. But Jimmy Carter, in some budgetary adjustments, defunded the Foreign Agricultural Service, which was the home base of this thing. And they didn't have any more money, so all these professors, these researchers, all went back to their local campuses, and went back to teaching and doing their segment of agricultural research. And of course, what happened when they came along, the Congress got ready to look at the new Farm Bill. They said, "Where's the Foreign Agricultural Service, their model? We have some questions." Well, then of course it was gone. So Congress, it was really led by Kit Bond here. He was really the big voice in this. So they reassembled. They went to the University of Missouri, and they brought all these guys back together, and they formed the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, which was made up of these half a dozen land-grant colleges in the Midwest. And they rebuilt that model. And it was a dynamic model, which meant that you could change one variable and it would reflect the collateral impact of what action you took. So that was completely restructured and refunded, and the University of Missouri had the responsibility for the U.S. Agricultural economy. And so that I was telling John Bruton about all that. Now, timing's everything. So what John Bruton was trying to figure out is how to settle the disputes between the North and the South of Ireland, and how to bring those farm economies together under the radar, you see. And that's what he was thinking. I was just bragging about the University of Missouri and the important things we were doing, And so at the end of that trip, and as we were parting, he said, "Jim, would you bring that factory group to Ireland?" He said, "If you bring him over there," see, I didn't know what he was thinking. He didn't know what I was thinking. I had a promotional mind for the university, and he had solving a major international crisis. So he said, "If you bring that team over," he said, "we'll have a meeting in my office or in my conference area, and I can guarantee you, every head of Irish government will be there and participating. We set a date, and the whole troop of us, about a dozen of us, Blanche Hill was with us, who was chancellor at UMSL, and George Russell, who was president of the faculty, or president of the system at that time, and we all went over to Ireland. And of course, we met with John Bruton, and he had all, it was a big room, and we had every member of the Irish government there, and he said, now, when I tell you what we want to do, we're going to do this in Ireland. We want to do it in the north and the south, and don't any of you guys tell me you don't have it in your budget. He says that's not an acceptable answer. So I don't know what that meant. I guess he meant that you better go dig under the rocks and see where some extra dollars are. So that's how we ended up, with that invitation. And that ended up us at FAPRI and University of Missouri, creating an econometric model with the colleges in the north and the south to study and be able to make determinations of the future of Irish agriculture. And so that developed. And of course, then the University of Missouri played a the leading role in putting that model, which ended up now it's spread all over Europe, But at that time it was just focused on the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, because it was dealing with a civic, economic, and political problem that needed to be solved. John Hume was kind of the leadership on the Irish side, and he was he was an MP in the Irish government at that time. And so they all started working this out together. Now, we had to fund that. We had to provide, well, not fund it, but we did really. We had to provide the researchers to go over and build that model.
To pay for them to go over, to stay.
So then it became, how do we fund this? How do we get it? Well, Ireland was prepared to fund it, the north and the south, but they had limitations on repatriation. So you couldn't get the money out. So we formed a not 501c corporation called the Magi Foundation, which we're using now to fund things here in the Pacific area, And so we set that up, and and we were able to repatriate the funds through that 501c3 to the University of Missouri to compensate and pay for the professors coming over, building the model in Ireland. And so because of that, the economies or the economic leadership began driving the resolution of these political and religious implications or conflicts, which ended up being created in the Good Friday Accords, which you may have heard of.
Yep.
It was signed by John Majors for England, or the British community, and John Bruton, who was then the Taoiseach, or the Prime Minister of Ireland, and the history has gone on from there. The University of Missouri has played a key role in the whole development of economic development and prognostications for the whole European economy. So it had all started with the little meeting right here. Yeah, and we've had a lot of exchange students. We have PhD students that have got their PhD from the University of Ulster, or from the University of Cork in Ireland. But now it's a very active inter-university community that's developed out of it. I know people all forget, it's hard to remember how it all came from, because it's very complex, you know, there's so many people involved in it now. But one of the original guys is still on our Magi Foundation board is Abner Womack, and Abner was the director of FAPRI during those days, and I still talk to him about once a month. You know, he's retired now, but he was chief economist at the University of Missouri at that time, and also the director of FAPRI, or Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute. So. And all of those things happened right here, you know. We had our meetings here. We formed the Magi Foundation here. Now the Magi Foundation, and we're still doing things, but we have primarily worked with the city on a lot of projects, because opportunity in the economy, opportunity in the business community, and the political realities never quite mesh. The opportunity's here, but by the time the politics catches up with it, the opportunity's gone. So these things are passing each other in the night all the time. So we decided that that's the role we'd play. So when opportunity come up, we would contract for it, and we would hold it temporarily till the city caught up, and then we signed it to the city. Well, the Pacific Ring is a very interesting idea. We started about 20 years ago to try to define what is a sustainable community. You know, everybody talked about sustainability, and nobody knew what the hell it was, or even knew, except the general definition is build something that will last. So we got into the analysis of the absolute advantage of community versus whether or not a community survived. Why is it still here? For some reason, it's been able to deal with all the slings and arrows that destroy communities, and they're still here. So you kind of look at, there has to be it must be an absolute advantage where it's able to survive. And so that led us to what's the absolute advantage of this area. And to do that, you have to get a big enough piece of the community to become statistically significant. So we just arbitrarily drew a 7.5 mile radius, the center of town here, the clock up here. And we said, and we, you know, it's very interesting. You could, if you try to get a community interest and get a community collaboration and agreement on something, you probably never do it. There's so many different ideas. So just invent one. And that's what we did. We said, they said, well, who gave you authority? You know, buddy. You know, if you want to call it something else, you do it, but we just declare this to be the Pacific Ring. And, well, what about if you're outside? Well, we don't care. It's just in the political boundary. It doesn't have any authority to do anything, but we do have the authority to study something from a specific angle. So we decided the Pacific Ring would be our project to determine what is sustainable. Because you can't talk about sustainability in a vacuum, and you can't just talk about it generally. You have to get some specifics, so you just create your own specifics, which is the base of your study. And that is the Pacific Ring. And that's what we've been talking about for 20 years.
And what have you found?
Huh?
What have you found?
Well, we found about what we expected to find. And that we went back, you know, and we found out what are we had a couple of university studies. We had the university, St. Louis University did a study about the Pacific Ring and about why is it sustainable and what makes it sustainable. Well, we had various other groups, including the University of Missouri, playing a role in that study. And what we found out, of course, is that why Pacific is still here is because it's got certain assets that have kept it alive. And why did it keep it alive? Because it had an absolute advantage over everybody else in the universe. And it's not exclusive, but it's the preponderance of the weight of the evidence. So one thing that's interesting you're talking about, you brought it up, is one thing is that the sandstone, the Pacific sandstone deposits. Now it's an absolute advantage because there's no place else except that we know where the other ones are, but this is an absolute advantage for this community. And of course, it built the U.S. silica plant. It was built there. It's still a huge producer of silica sand. But the very interesting thing about it is that as big as it is and all the sand it produced, there's no added value down here in the Pacific. Or nobody doing it. You know, one time, 50 years ago, there was a glass factory.
Yeah.
You know, the windows in the opera house upstairs were made from Pacific sandstone that came off the hill out up there. From the caves that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But now they just, and it's a unique type of silicon. It's a high quality silicon, so it has its own special applications. Well, there's all kinds of interesting applications of that sand. One, it sounds kind of silly, but it is the premier sand quality for these sand volleyball courts. It's the best, highest quality that they all want to build these sand volleyball courts. They're also, it's used in all kinds of construction material, but none of it's done here. All shipped out, and the biggest component of cost for silicon is a ingredient is shipping costs. So it would seem to me that creative minds would drive you to say, why don't we do some of that stuff here? And it's still an untouched resource.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that came out of the study. The other one is that we have a river, a highway, a river, and a railroad tracks. They all come together right here. And they go out through every place in the country. And yet, there's no way to get to the river from here. Unless you go, there's nothing, now people don't know how to get there, but they can go through the Palisades and they can find an exit down there. And that's what was really driving our project on the sustainability. And we ought to have a big sand industry or something here that's using sand. If it's the biggest cost of the ingredients, it's the transportation, and the transportation's right here. Why in the hell wouldn't we do something about that? See, but until you get all those pieces together, and to trigger the imagination of some people that can do things. Mm-hmm. Leadership, it's the whole issue of defined leadership and focused leadership. So that was the other thing that all these studies found, is that those are two of our real absolute advantages, is the river walk, whether it be for entertainment or for industrial purpose. The sand, that's here, and anywhere else, and that's how you get an absolute advantage. You say, well, why? Otherwise, imaginative industry will take it someplace else, but there's no place else to go. Yeah. It's my only regret is that I'm 91 instead of 35. If I was 35, I'd be right as I was when I was young, in the middle of those things. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you decide to do it, and you do a good job of selecting the focus, you know. But then it needs leadership. It needs somebody